In this tutorial, we're going to build a chat app using React, Redux, Redux-Saga, and WebSockets. This is actually based on a tutorial by Flavio Copes, and I'm going to link to that article in the description. So in this basic chat room program, every user that connects to the server is registered upon connection, and they get a username, and then they can write messages that are broadcast to every connected client. This is going to be a distributed application built using a Node.js server and a browser client written in React. And then we're going to use Redux to manage the data, and then manage the side effects using Redux-Saga. So it's good to have some experience with React and Redux, but you don't need to. If you need a refresher on React, or if you've never used React before, you should check out my introduction to React video. So check the link in the description for that. We're also going to handle the client-server communication using WebSockets. Also, you can see the entire source code on GitHub in the link in the description. So first, we're just going to install create React app. So I'm just going to do npm install g create React app. Okay, after that we get that installed, we're just going to use the create React app quick starter. So create React app chat. Okay, now that's installed. Let me just clear my screen. I'm going to cd into the app folder, which is just chat, so it's cd chat. And then I'm going to do yarn start. So over my web browser, we can see on the localhost 3000, we have the basic welcome to React screen. So we have created our basic template. So our quick starter has worked. Once we finish our app, we're going to have the basic layout where we're going to have a users list on the side, we're going to have the message list up here, and then at the bottom we're going to have the new message box. To do this, we're going to create a static version of the chat using plain HTML and CSS. So the code for that is pretty simple. I'm in Sublime Text right now, and you can see all the files on the side that were created with my create React app starter. Okay, I'm going to start with the CSS. I'm just going to go to the source directory and then this app.css file. This was all just put here by default. So I'm going to change this. Just for this section, I'm just going to paste in the code. All the rest I'm actually going to type out in this tutorial, but this is not really focused on CSS. I do have a link to this exact CSS in the description of the video, so you can go and grab that and then be able to paste it in. So I'm going to save that, and then I'm going to go into app.js here. So here's the default stuff, but we're going to change this a little bit. Specifically, everything in this return we are going to change. We're going to have an aside. ID equals sidebar. And it's just going to have the users over in that sidebar. And then we're going to have a section with an ID of main. Let's get this here. And inside that section, we're going to have another section with an ID of messages list. It's just going to say messages list. And then one more section. I'm just going to duplicate that line, and this is going to be called the new message section. And then we just have to end this other section. Oh, one more thing. We do need to change this default up here. So this is going to be ID equals container. That will work with our CSS a little better. Okay, now back on our website, I did zoom in on this website 300%, so everything was a little bigger, but you can see we have a user section, a messages list section, and then the new message section. So this is what the basic layout of our app is going to look like. Okay, we're going to use Redux to manage the state of our app. So that's how we're going to manage all the data in our app. So we're first going to have to install Redux. So let's do yarn add Redux React Redux. Okay, now that Redux is installed, we're just going to translate this basic HTML layout we added and just prepare it to fill in the components we'll create later. So right up here, I'm going to import some things. I'm going to import sidebar. Now this is something that we haven't created yet. I'm going to import it from containers / sidebar, and we'll create that in a little bit here. I'm going to duplicate those two lines, and now sidebar will become messages list. So see, I'm double clicking the word to select it, and then I just do Command D to select the next occurrence, and then I can edit both at the same time. By the way, to duplicate a line, I just did Shift Command D to duplicate. And now I'm going to change this stuff down here. Instead of having this aside, we're actually going to have the sidebar container. So I'm just going to put sidebar. And then we still have the section ID main. But for this section, it's now going to become messages list. And then this section is going to become the add message. Now these three components are all going to have a presentational component which manages the user interface, and a container component which manages its behavior and the data that the presentational component will show. So let's go over to this index.js file, and in this file we are going to initialize Redux, and then we're going to import the chat reducer and then create the store. Now, reducers are just part of Redux. So this was all this code that was already created by the Create React app. We're just going to import a few more things. We're going to import the provider from React Redux. And then we're going to import the create store from Redux. Now the create store is where we're going to store all the data for the app. The only other thing we're going to import is chat from reducers. And then I'm just going to create a const here. Const store equals create store. And like I said, that's going to be our data that we're going to be using. It's going to use to be stored all the data for our app, and we're going to import. See, we're going to pass in our reducer, which we're still going to create. This chat reducer we still have to create, but that's what is going to be able to really get in all of our data into our store. It's just part of Redux. And then down here where it's rendering something, we're going to change things up a little bit. Okay, I'm going to add a provider. I'm going to use the provider and set what the store is. It's going to equal store. And then we have the app inside it. And then provider. Now we're going to create the actions. In Redux, whenever you're going to change the state, you do it through an action, because the store, the overall state for our application is read-only. We're never going to write directly to the state, when we're going to do it all through an action. So we're going to create a new folder in here. I'm going to go to new folder, and this is going to be called actions. And inside this folder, I'm going to do a new file, index.js. We are going to first import star as types from constants action types. Now this is another file we're going to have to create. We're going to bring in the types from this other file that we're going to create in just a second. So I'm going to let next message ID equal 0 and const next user ID equals 0. So I'm just going to set up some data we're going to use in here. And here's the first action we can do. Const add message equals message author. So if we're going to add a message, we're going to call this action add message, and we're going to pass in the message and the author, or who the message is from. So we're going to send the message. It's going to have a type of types.add message. Actually, let's just go and create the types right now. So that was in this file, constant/action types. So I'm going to create a new directory here, new folder, constants. And in constants, I'm going to have a new file called action types.js. Sometimes you can do constants in the same file, but when you're going to have a bigger application, it's going to be better to break things up into different files. So I'm just going to do export const add message. And this is going to be pretty basic. It's just going to be add. So the constant add message is just the string add message. So I'm going to do Command Shift duplicate, and we're going to duplicate that 4 times, and Command D, select the next occurrence, message received. Ooh, I before E, except after C. Okay, so now we're going to do this add user and users list. Actually, for a small app like this, we don't even really need to have constants like this. We could actually put this as a string right here instead of going to this constant. But it's just good practice, because when you get to a bigger app, you're going to want to use constants like this. Just in case you want to change things later, it makes things a lot easier to change. Okay, let's continue adding our message. So when you add a message, it's going to have the type, which is add message. That's the type of the action. We're going to have the ID, which is next message ID plus plus. So you can see up there that it starts at 0, and then for each message that gets added, it will just increment the message ID. And then we're going to include the message, which is what was passed into this action, and the author, which was also passed into the action. And now we're going to create another action, export const. We're only going to have 4 actions. There's going to be add message, add user, message received, and populate users list. So this one is going to be add user, and I'm going to just pass in a name, and the type is going to be types.add user, and then the ID, that's why we started the user ID at the top as 0, so this is just going to be next user ID increment. And then obviously we need the name that was passed into this action, because that's going to be the user's name. And the next action is going to be message received. And so we're going to pass in the message and the author. Now it's going to be types dot message received, and then we're still, the ID is going to be just like the add message, where it's going to be next message ID plus plus. Now, the reason why there's a, oh, oops, this was supposed to be lowercase. The reason why we have the add message and the message received, and they both have the same type of ID. The difference is add message is when the current user, like you, are adding a message. Messages received is when the other user in the chat program is adding a message. So you're receiving a message from someone else is message received, but the message ID is still going to increment both ways. Oh, okay. I was looking at how the colors, like this wasn't green up here. I think I need this here here. Oh, there we go. So I need that more than sign to make this into an arrow up there. Okay, back to here. We're going to pass in the message and the author. And one more action. Export const populate users list equals users. And the type is going to be types.users list. And then we're going to pass in the users. Yep, those are our 4 actions. You can add a new message, a new user can be added to the chat, a new message can be sent, and the server will send updates to the users list when a person joins or quits the chat. Now, these are the actions, but the actions don't actually change the state. So this right here is showing that when you add a user, it's basically creating almost this JSON object here, but that's not actually changing anything. That's what the reducers are for. So the reducers take care of creating a new state when an action is dispatched. So in particular, when a message is added by us, we're going to add it to the local list of messages. When we receive a message from the server, we add it to our list of messages. When we add a user, we put it in the users list, and when we get an updated users list from the server, we refresh. So let's start creating those reducers that are actually going to change the state of our app. So let me save that file, and I'm going to create a new directory. So in the source file, I'm going to go to a new folder, and it's going to be called reducers. And in here, a new file, and the first one is index.js. Let's see, let me make sure everything's saved. I'm going to close some of this stuff for now. Okay, so I'm in the reducers index.js, and we could put all of our reducers into one file, but since we have both messages and users, we are going to create this one file. We're actually going to break it up into 2 files, the messages reducer and then the users reducer. And then this file, index.js, is going to combine the messages and users reducer into one reducer. So it'll make more sense as we go here, but we're going to do combine reducers from Redux, and then we're going to import messages from messages, and we're going to import users from users. And then these messages and users are something we still have to create those. But first, we're just going to finish off this file. Const chat equals combine reducers. Now, and you can see the combine reducers just comes from Redux, and we're going to pass in messages and users. So this is just combining 2 reducers into one reducer, and we're going to export default chat. Oh, I spelled export wrong. There we go. And save that. So we're done with that file, and I'm going to create another file in the reducers directory. This one's going to be called messages.js. The reducer is what actually changes the state of your application. So this is going to change the state of the messages in our application. So first, we're going to do const messages equals state. In a reducer, you always pass in the current state and an action, and you return the new state. So when we call messages, you always pass in the state and the action, and if there is no state, it's going to be set to an empty array. But if there already is a state, it will pass in whatever the state of the messages are. If there are already messages, it will just pass in the current list of messages and the action, and it's going to return a new state. So let's figure out what we're going to do now. So we have switch. We're going to create a switch statement to figure out which type of action is happening. So we have action.type. So that's the action that was passed in. And just to kind of make this more clear, let's go back to our action file. So this is an action that could be passed into our reducer. You can see there's a type, an ID, a message, and an author. So we're passing in that action, and so when the action right here is the action we passed in. So the action.type, for instance, would be type.addMessage. That would be an example of one of the types. So let's finish this switch statement. So if under the case of add message, so if we pass in the type of the action of add message, we are going to do something. But actually, we're going to do the same thing whether the case is add message or if the case is message received. So we're just going to put two case statements together, and we are going to return state.concat. So state.concat basically means we're going to take the current state and we're going to add this onto the end. So we are going to, let's see. Here we go. Yeah, we're going to add a new message. The message is action.message. That's what we pass in with our action. The author is going to be action.author, and the ID is going to be action.id. And change the indentation a little bit. Okay, so now we're going to go back to the default. So the default just means if, wait a second, let me finish typing this first. Okay, so we have these two cases. If those cases, we're going to add a message and return the state with the new message, which is just the state with adding this new message on it. If the action is not add message or message received, we're just going to return the state that was already there. So we're not going to change the state at all. We're just going to return the current state. And then down here, we're just going to put export default messages. And we're going to I'm just going to do some refactoring here. See how I use the string? We did make those constants over here. These action type constants. So I'm going to change this to use those action type constants. So let's see, I'm going to import star as types from constants action types. And then here I'm going to just change this to types.addMessage without the quotation marks. Types.message received. Okay, looks good. I'm going to copy this top line because I'm going to use this in the next file I'm going to create. I'm going to go to a new file, and this time it's going to be users.js. And in this file, like I said, I'm going to start with this importing the types because we're going to use those again. And this is going to be pretty similar to the last file. Users equal, we always pass in our state, which if there isn't a state at all yet, it'll become an empty array. And we're going to pass in our action, and then we're going to do something with that. So again, we're going to do a switch statement to find out what action was passed in. Action.type. Now this time, the different cases will not be exactly the same. So if the case is types.add user, we're just going to return state.concat. This is going to be pretty similar to the messages one. We're going to concat a new user onto here. Name, action.name, and the ID is going to equal action.id. Now we're going to get the case of types.users list. And then we're just going to return action.users. Basically, instead of just adding a user to the list, when we call the action users list, that means we're getting in an entirely new users list. So we're just going to return, so the state of the users just becomes the entire users list that was just passed in, instead of adding one user onto the current users list. And then the default is going to be return. The default is always the same. It's always return state. If you didn't pass in users, add user, or users list, then we're just going to return the state. And then go down here, export default users. And we're done with that file. If we go back into our original app.js file, and then remember we imported the sidebar message list, add message, these containers, now it's actually time to create those containers. Now if we go back into our original app.js file, we can see the components we were using, the sidebar, messages list, add message. Now we're actually going to create those components. So let's start with the add message components. First, I'm going to create the folder called containers, because you can see we put them all into a folder called containers. And in here, a new file called add message.js. So this is going to be a functional component that's pretty simple. It's going to create an input field into the new message section of the page, and when the enter key is pressed, we're going to dispatch the add message action, passing the value of the input field. So let's start that. We're going to import React from React, import prop types from prop types, const add message equals props, and we're gonna let input, we're gonna create this input variable here, and we're gonna just return the actual component here. Section ID is going to equal new message, and input on key press. So if someone presses the key into the input field, we're going to do something here. If e.key equals enter, so anytime you press the enter key, we're going to props.dispatch. Here we're going to dispatch an action, and we're going to pass in the value of the input field, and then we are going to pass in the user's name. So the value is the message that's being sent, and then we want to know the user who is sending that message. For now, we're just going to set it as me. Me is sending the message. And then we're going to set the value to an empty string. So that's the value of the input field. So it was whatever you typed in, and now it's just going to be nothing because you've sent the message. To make this props.dispatch work, I'm just going to go down to the bottom here and put add message.prop types equals dispatch prop types dot func dot is required. Okay, now we're going to go up here and we're going to add some more information to the input field here. The type of this input field is going to be text, and for the reference, input equals node. And then I'm just going to end this section here, and I'm going to move this parentheses to there. And the last thing is export default add message. So next up is going to be the message component, which is going to render a single chat message by using the author message format. So what I'm going to do is just duplicate this add message, and this is just going to be called message, and I'm just going to change some of this stuff. So instead of add message, it's message. We're going to return something different here. Let's see. We're not going to have the input. We're going to pass in two things, a message and the author. Okay, I'm going to take out this whole section here and put parentheses, and inside the message we're just going to have a p tag, and we're going to have the author and the message. For the message.prop types, we're going to have message is a string, author is also a string, and then export default message. Okay, I'm going to save that file. So this message is going to be rendered by the message list component, which iterates over the list of messages. So instead of duplicating, I'm just going to copy this beginning that I'm going to kind of reuse in my next file, new file, and this is going to be called messages list, also in my containers folder .js, and put in the beginning thing here. This is going to be called const messages list, and here we're just going to have the messages, and we're going to have a section of ID. It's going to equal messages list, and then this is just going to be an unordered list. Inside is messages.map, and for each message in the messages list, we're going to do the message. The key is going to equal message.id do message, and then I'm just going to end the unordered list tag and in the section tag. And then I'm going to declare the prop types here. Messages prop types dot array of. So let's see what's going to be in the messages. We're going to do prop types dot shape ID, prop types dot number dot is required, and message prop types dot string dot is required. And let's get a comma here. Duplicate author. So we're going to have an ID, a message, and an author for each message. And just add another is required here. And another is required. The final thing is just exporting this. Okay, now we've finished the messages list, so we're going to create the sidebar component, which instead of iterating over the messages is going to iterate over each user. So I'm just going to do a new file, and let's try that again, new file, and I'm going to do sidebar.js. And just like from the messages list, where some of the things start the same, so I'm just going to copy this first few lines. We're going to import React and prop types, and instead of const message list, it's going to be const sidebar. And instead of messages, we're going to put users. We're going to have this aside here, and with ID equals sidebar, and class name, which is the same as class, is going to equal sidebar. Then we're actually just going to make an unordered list of all the users. So let's do users.map. We're going to pass in, for each user, I mean, we're going to do a list item, li. The key is going to equal the user.id. And then we're going to have user.name. So it's going to just show each user's name. So that's the end of the list item. And then that's also the end of the unordered list. And that's the end of the aside. Now, let's see, we need a final parentheses to end that. And then we just need to set up what our prop types are. So sidebar.prop types equals the users, which is prop types dot array of new prop types dot shape. So we're going to define the shape of this property. We have the ID, which is just prop types dot, it's going to be a number, is required. And then I'm just going to copy this line, and this is going to be name is prop types dot string is required, and this whole thing is going to be dot is required. And also this, whoops, what did I do here? I'm going to put that to the next line, dot is required. And then we just have to export the default sidebar. Okay, we just finished that one. Now we're going to make our containers. And actually, we already have this containers folder, is because I actually misnamed this. This was actually supposed to be the components folder. So I'm going to rename this containers folder components. And now I'm going to make a new folder that's containers. So containers. Basically, we're going to generate the container components for the presentational components. So in this components directory, which I just renamed, these are the presentational components, and we have to make the container components. And then we're going to use the connect function from React Redux. So this is something that we do for Redux. So I'm going to create a new file here, and this is just going to be add message .js. So all the names are going to be the same from the container from these other components. Like we have this add message here, now we have this add message here, and it's going to be a pretty simple file. First, we're just going to import connect, and this will help us connect them together from React Redux. And then I'm going to import the add message component, which is the one that we created from, and then I just have to put where it's located, components / add message. And then I'm going to import one of our actions, the add message action from our action folder, actions. Now we're going to do const map dispatch to props. It's going to equal dispatch, and here we're just going to define what dispatch is going to be. Dispatch, we're going to pass in the message and the author, and dispatch. So this dispatch right here is actually right from Redux. So message and the author, and I'm going to fix this here. Now I just have to export that, const add message, and here's where we use the connect. So connect, and we're going to pass in this empty object here. Oh, the comma here. Map dispatch to props, add message component. So this is basically going to connect to the add message component. So I'm just going to save that, and I'm just going to duplicate this, but this time it's going to be called messages list. We have to do this for each of our components that we created. So in messages list, we're going to have connect. We're going to have this time we're going to have messages component. So I'm going to change this to messages component. And actually it's messages list component. And then instead of add message, it's going to be messages list. So messages list, and we don't have to import this action because we are not going to do the action. Before we use this add messages action, but we're not going to do that. Actually, we're going to get rid of this whole thing here. We don't need any of that. So const, instead of add message, it's going to be messages list equals connect, and here, I'm just going to start this from scratch here. So connect state, I'm going to pass in the state, and it's going to be messages state dot messages, and this here, then the messages list component, and then one more. This one's going to be this. For the sidebar component, it's going to be very similar to this. So again, I'm going to, let me save this, and then I'm going to duplicate. This is going to be sidebar. And then here, this is going to be sidebar component. I just did Command D to select both, and I'm going to put sidebar component. And then, just change this to the word sidebar. And we change this to the word sidebar. I could have done this all at once, sidebar. And here, it's just going to be, instead of messages, it's going to be users. And see, I just did both these at once, users and users. And we're done with that one, so I'm going to save that. And at this point, we've done enough to actually do some tests here. So let me go back to my browser. And failed to compile. Maybe I should have been checking this all along. There's probably gonna be a few things that I've had a mistake on. It looks like I'm missing a closing tag. Wait, what file? That was on sidebar.js. So let's go over here, and I need a closing tag there. I'm just gonna restart my server here, and let's see what happens. Okay, messages.js, line 13, so let's try that in the reducer. So let me go back to, let's see, the reducers messages.js, line 13. May not need this one. Okay, can't resolve constant/action types. Let's see, let's go back to that. Users.js, constant/action types. Oh, okay. I see what I did wrong. This folder's spelled wrong. So let's rename this constants. Done. And let's see what we got going here. Okay, we're gonna restart the server again. Okay, can't resolve containers slash add message app.js can't containers slash add message. So let's see what's wrong there. Okay, we have app.js containers slash add message. Let's go to containers slash add message and oh, okay. Here's the problem. We have the containers in the wrong spot, so this should actually be in the source folder. So I'm going to move this, and it's just going to be chat slash src slash containers. And now let's see what happens. I'll save that, and it's compiling. Okay, we have another problem. Next user ID is read only. So let's see what we have to do. Go to index.js. That wasn't it. Actions index.js. So let's go here. Oh, this is going to be a const. This should be a let. So let's save that. And now let's see what happens. Let's see, unexpected token. Oh, I forgot the end thing again. I think because I copy and pasted. So components add messages right here. Finish that. Let's just check all these while I'm here. All those seem right. So let's go see if it compiled. Okay, unexpected token, add message. Okay, components, add message, line 17. Okay, my problem here is I didn't have an equal sign, so let's save that and compile again. Okay, let's see, components, add message, line 20. Components, add message, line 20 right here. Oh, I didn't close my input above there, so let's close the input. Okay, export message received, import type was not found in constants action types. Let's see, actions.index. This be EI. Let's see what happens now. Message list does not contain an export name messages list. Let's see, containers, messages list. Okay, the problem is I have a S here when there shouldn't be an S. So let's save that. Okay, this is another one where there's a singular plural issue. So let's see, containers slash messages list. Okay, containers, messages list. Oh, again, this should be singular. And let's see if that works. Messages is not defined. Messages list, line 8. Let's see, components messages list. Messages is not defined. I think we have to import messages from message, and I'm gonna do import message. Let's see if that works. Okay, can't resolve component slash sidebars. Containers. You know, I'm having a hard time with these plural things, so this should just be sidebar. Now let's check that. Oh, I spelled users wrong. Oh, I'm in the wrong one. Line 7, users. Compiled with warnings. That means it actually compiled. And it's actually looking how it should look. So let me put something in the bottom here. Hello. And it appears. Hi. So I put a message in there and it's going to show it above here. So now you can see every time it says me. Cereal is good. So right now we only have one user, me, and it appears right up here from the messages. So that's good. We're getting somewhere. Now we have to add ourselves in the user list. You can see there's no user on the side here, and it should show the list of users. since we're not actually talking to anyone yet, we should at least see me in the sidebar. Later on, we'll add additional people that join the chat. We already have the add user Redux action, so it's a matter of calling it in our index.js file after initializing the store. So we already have the add user Redux action. If you go into the actions, you can see the add user here. So it's a matter of calling it in our index.js file after initializing the store. So we're going to go over to index.js here, and after we initialize the store here, we're going to do store dot dispatch, and we're going to dispatch the add user action, and just going to add the user me. And this is just how we are going to register ourselves as present in the chat. And since we use this add user here, I'm going to have to import that. So import add user from, and we're just going to import it from actions. And I really should have paid attention to these warnings before. Expect it to return a value in the arrow function, and expect an assignment or function call. So I think the problem here is that this should be a parentheses instead of a bracket. So let's change this to a bracket, parentheses here, and save that. Now let's see if this works. Good. Less warnings. Logo is defined but never used. I'm not going to worry about that. And now it does show me there. So that's the user there. Hey, do you want a marshmallow? Probably spelled wrong. That's okay, because in chat you can spell things wrong. Okay, so let's go back over. We just have a few more things to finish up. Okay, I'm going to just close some of these files here. We're about to get started on the server side part. A chat that is local and that does not communicate with the network is just not super interesting, so we need to be able to talk with other people through a server. So we're going to create a centralized server where users will log into, and then they can talk to each other. So we're going to go back to at the chat folder up here, and I'm going to create a new folder. So this is just going to be called server, and it should be at the same level as the src folder. So inside server, I'm going to create a file, and this file is called app.js. So we're going to use the native WebSocket object in the browser, which is pretty widely supported, and use the WS WebSocket library on the Node.js server. So here's the server. We're gonna do a const WebSocket equals require. So that's the WS WebSocket library. We're gonna create the WebSocket server, new WebSocket.server, and then we just have to put in the port here. We're gonna use port 8989. So that's the port we're gonna connect to. And we also want to keep a list of users on the server, so we're just going to initialize the variable users as an empty array. And we're going to finish creating the server here. We're going to const broadcast data, and we're going to pass in, so passing the data and the web server. So for each client that's attached to the web server, So if the client is in, if the client's ready state is in the WebSocket.open, and the client does not equal the WebSocket, we're just going to do client.send, send the data, JSON.stringify data. Okay, let's go down here. Now here's where the web server is going to send different things depending on what's going on. So on connection, pass in the WebSocket, the index, so the WebSocket servers received some data, and it's received a message. So we're going to parse the message into our data variable. Parse, and then we're going to have a switch statement, because depending on what the data actually is, we're going to do something different. So data.type. If the data message is showing add user, then index.users. Index equals user.length, and users.push. We're going to actually just push the user onto here, and the name is going to equal name, or data.name, and the ID is index +1. And then ws.send, we just send the user list here. So json.stringify type users list, and then we're going to send users, so the list of users. Now for the next case, which is, oh wait, we forgot one thing. I'm going to go up here and broadcast type users. Type is users list, and then users. So we have to send it, we have to do the ws.send this, and then we also have to broadcast it. And let's see, and then also the WebSocket, and then break it. So now we can go back to this case add message. This time we're just going to broadcast with type add message, and then the message data.message, and the author data.author, and then also we have to pass in the WebSocket instance. So then we break, and the default is just going to be to break, because there's only two things that the server does: adds user and adds a message. Now up here we showed what happens when there's a connection to the WebSocket server, but now we have to show what happens when things close. So let's go down here. So ws.on close, users dot splice index 1 broadcast. So when it says users dot splice index 1, that's just removing that current user from the users list. So if someone closes their browser, it's just going to remove their username from the users list. So I'm going to put users list, users, and ws. And that's it. That's it for this file. So I'm just going to save that file. So basically in this file, as soon as the client connects, we're going to start listening for the add users and the add message events. So as soon as a client connects, we start listening for the add user and then the add message event. And when the client connects, establishes a connection to the server, it will send the add user event with the name. And then, see, we just add it to the server side. So here we're just going to add it to the server side list of users and then issue a broadcast to all the connected clients. So when we add a message, when the add message event is sent to the server, we broadcast it to all the connected clients. So everyone connected to the server will get that message. And then on the connection close, we remove the user's name from the list and broadcast the new users list. So that was what I was saying here, and then it broadcasts a new users list to everyone, so they know that there's no user, that user is not on the list anymore. And so on the client side, we now need to initialize the WebSocket object and send an add user event when we connect to the client. We're also going to have to set up where the client is going to listen for the add user and add message events from that are broadcast to the client. And just one more thing, you can see we use the strings here instead of the constants. It's because the server can't actually read this constants, anything from the constants folder, because the client and the server are completely separated. So in the src folder, that's the client side, I'm going to create a new folder just called sockets. And then inside that folder, I'm going to create a new file called index.js. So this will have our sockets information, obviously. So first I'm just going to import the action types. So types from constants / action types. And then I'm going to import the actions. We're just going to import the exact actions we need. So it's going to be add user, message received, populate users list, and that's going to be from actions. And then const set up socket. I'm going to put dispatch and username. See, passing in dispatch will allow us to dispatch events. And now we're going to create a const, the socket. This is going to be our new WebSocket. WebSocket. We're going to set as localhost 8989, which obviously this would be different depending on if you're running it locally or on an actual web server. So now socket.onOpen. Once we open the WebSocket connection, we are going to send some information. Remember, as soon as you get on the server, we're going to send the username. So socket.send json.stringify So as soon as you connect, you broadcast your username, and then the server will receive that username and then send out to all the people that are connected to the server that there's been a new user added to the chat room, basically. And socket.onMessage. Okay, and when we send a message, we're going to pass in an event object. And now we have to be able to send this message to the server. So first, we're going to do const data equals JSON dot parse, and we're going to get the event dot data. And now a switch statement to figure out what the data actually is. So data dot type. If the case is types dot add message, we're going to dispatch message received. So on message is when we're receiving a message from the server. So if that message if we're getting a message, we're going to dispatch the message received, and we're going to do data.message, data.author. So we're getting this information right from the server, the message and the author, and we're dispatching this action. So then we're going to break and case types dot add user. Put that over there. Dispatch add user data.name. So we're receiving this new user from the server, and we're just adding that user to our local copy of the user. And break. And the last thing we can receive, types.users list. So if we're getting a whole list of users, dispatch populate users list and data.users. So all this information is coming directly from the server, and our default is that we're going to break. We're not going to do anything if we don't get one of those types, which really should never happen. So now we're going to return socket, and finally export default setup socket. And then I just have to go over to the main index file, index.js, and I'm going to import this setup sockets from there. So import setup socket from sockets. And now we need to introduce a way to handle side effects into our code, and to handle creating a WebSocket event when the user types a message, so it can be broadcast to all the connected clients. So to perform this operation in a clean way, we're going to make use of Redux-Saga, which is a library that provides a good way to handle side effects in Redux React. So the reason why this is a side effect is because whenever you're getting an information from the server, you're not sure exactly what's going to happen. There could be an error. You could get the right information. The server, if you're not actually creating the server, you may not know for sure what the server, if it changed or something. So in Redux, you always want things to happen right away. But with Redux-Saga, it allows things to happen more asynchronously and account for side effects that could happen where your function is changing something outside of the function. So normally in Redux, every function, your functions should be pure functions that don't change anything outside of the function. But if you're dealing with a server, just by the very nature, you're going to be dealing with something outside of your function. So that's why it's good to use Redux-Saga, which can handle these side effects. So we're actually going to have to install it. So let me go over to my console. Oh, before I actually install it, maybe I should deal with some of these errors here. So let's see, unexpected token. Oh, I forgot the word as. Import star as types. Actions that not contain user export name populate users list. Let's look at the actions here. Oh, spelled this wrong. So populate users list. setup socket is defined but never used. Okay, we are going to use that in a second. So now we've dealt with all the errors. I'm going to go to this other tab here, clear that screen. Okay, yarn add Redux-Saga. Okay, now we just have to initialize that. So let's go back to our index.js. Well, let's move some of these around. It's not important, but generally we're going to put the things that don't start with a period first. So see how the word React, there's no period in front of it. These are coming from libraries. They're not from a local file. But all these come from, since it starts with a period, that means it's coming from a local file. So I'm going to separate it like that. Put this together, and then we're going to import create Saga middleware from Redux-Saga. And then down here, we're going to import something that we haven't created quite yet. Import handle new message from Sagas. We're going to create that soon. And another thing we're going to create soon, I'll just add it now, is import username from utils/name. It's going to be how we're going to create the username for the user. And now I'm going to create a new const, which is just called Saga middleware equals create Saga middleware. So we'll call that function. Now it says const store. We're going to change this up a little bit. So create store, and instead of chat, we're now going to call reducers, or we're going to pass in reducers, and that's actually going to come right from here. Instead of import chat, we're going to change this in a second here, but I'm going to call this reducers. And so now we're going to pass in reducers here, and then also apply middleware Saga middleware, comma. Okay, now I'm going to get rid of this store.dispatch user add user meet, because now we're going to create a user in a different way through the sockets, the start web sockets. So here I'm going to do const equals socket, const socket equals setup socket store.dispatch username. So now I'm going to send over the username. We're going to do something with the Saga middleware. Saga middleware.run handle new message socket username. And at the very bottom, after we register the service worker from Redux, I should do apply middleware. So Redux-Saga is a Redux middleware, so we need to initialize it during the store creation. So that's why we have the apply middleware here, and then the Saga middleware. And once we've initialized the Redux-Saga middleware, so then we're going to create the socket with setup socket and passing the dispatch function the username, and then we're going to run the middleware and pass the handle new message function from the Sagas, and then the socket, which has our dispatch function, our username, and then the username. So after we initialize the middleware with that apply middleware in the store creation, we are going to initialize the socket so we can reference it inside the Saga. And then we just run the middleware, and we have to pass in the handle new message Saga, and then the socket, which has the dispatch and the dispatch function, the username. Before, the user was called me, but we want to actually have different names and not just me for all the users. Just for this example chat app, we're just going to use a dynamic username generator. We could make it so a user has to type in their username, and that's just going to be a little more complicated than what we want to do for the app right now. If you want to do that, add that functionality on your own, you can. But we're just going to create this dynamic username generator using chance.js. So let's create this file, this utils.name. So in the source, I'm going to create a new folder called utils. And then in utils, I'm going to create a new file called name.js. And I'm going to import chance from chance. And const chance equals new chance. Export default chance.first. And I should have already installed this, so we actually have to do an npm install for chance. So let's go back to here, npm install chance. Okay, we got that installed. Chance is just a random generator. It can generate random strings, numbers. For instance, this chance.first is just a random first name. Chance.last would be random last name. You could do chance.phone to get a random phone number. So we're just going to create a random name for this example. So now we'll create the sagas. So do a new folder in the src folder called sagas. And then inside sagas, new file, index.js. And then I'm going to import take every. This is something directly from Redux-Saga, from Redux-Saga /effects. I'm going to import star as types from, these are just our constants, /action types. So we're going to define our saga, which is going to be a handle new message. If you remember, we already used this in our other file. If we go back to we use our handle new message here with the saga middleware, so we're going to define that here. So this is going to equal function. Now this function star is a generator function, which basically means that whenever you run the function, it could return something slightly different. It's going to generate something new. So that's what we're going to use. That's for this saga. Handle new message params. Yield. Every time you a generator function, you always have yield, and it's going to yield do the next yield every time. So we're going to do take every action action.author equals params.username and so we're handling a new message from the server. Basically, it can do this asynchronously, and it can add the message with the author and the action. So this saga is basically taking all of the actions of type add message, take every action of type add message, and when this action occurs, we're going to send a message to the WebSocket. So here we're sending a message to the WebSocket, and when this occurs, we send a message to the WebSocket passing in the action and some details. And so the chat message sent by our user can be dispatched to all connected clients by the server. Okay, and there are some things we don't need up here. We don't need this import add user from actions. We're not going to use that anymore. And I have a spelling error. So this handle new message, there should be an E in here. Let me just restart the server. Okay, let me try npm install again. Okay, now let's try running the server again. Okay, sockets does not contain an export name setup socket. Let's just try taking these squiggly braces off around here. Okay, export default imported as handle new message was not found in sagas. Okay. So I'm in sagas. I'm in index where it says handle new message. I'm just going to say export default handle new message. Okay, module not found. Can't resolve util / name. Going back in this file, and I probably need a slash here. So let's try that. Okay. We're not gonna use a logo. So what's this line 6? Expect an assignment or function call and instead saw an expression. Let's see, index line 6. Let's see what that is. Yield take every. Okay, let's try taking out this comma here. Okay, it's compiled with warnings. So let's see, but maybe I should just take out that logo just to stop getting that warning. So that was in app.js. And I'm just going to delete this line here. Okay, compiled successfully. As you know, this app has a front end and back end. So we're going to have to be running the back end server at the same time that we're running the front end. So let's finish up setting up our server so we can get that to run. First, we just have to make the file runnable. So we have to do the sudo chmod 0777.server/app.js so we can add the ability to run the server. And also, if you remember, the server uses the WS library. So I already did this, so I'm not going to do this again, but you're going to have to put in npm install --save ws to install that WebSocket library. Okay, now we just have to change directories into our server directory, and we're going to run the server by just putting node app.js. And it looks like we do have an error. So let's go back over to our server file, the app.js in the server directory. And down here, I just need to add a comma here. And then also I've spelled client wrong. You're probably getting kind of tired of my spelling errors, so we have to fix this again. I know I have quite a few that you're probably noticing as I'm doing it. So let's just run the server again, node app.js, and it's working. So let's try refreshing this, and we have another mistake. So given the action users list, so let's go back over here. Again, this is kind of another spelling error. We have to add an S to this. This should be plural, users. Okay, let's run this again. And the server is running. There's no error, so we know that it's actually working. Let's make sure our front end is still running correctly. So in one tab in the terminal, I have the server running. And in the other tab in the terminal, I have the front end of it running. So you need both of those running for this to work. And let's test this out again. And it's working. It's adding my randomly generated name to the users list. And I'm going to try putting in a message. Hello. Yep. So whenever I put in a message, it lists me as the name. But in the users list, my name is Clayton. So let's try getting some more users here. So I have another tab, and I have a third tab. And see, as soon as I go into the website, you can see the new users added to the list. So now I have 3 users under 3 different tabs and 3 different windows. Hi, everyone. You can see it shows up on every tab. Hi, Clayton. So now you can see how the chat app works. We have all the features implemented. I hope you learned a lot, and thanks for watching. My name is Beau Carnes. Don't forget to subscribe, and remember, use your code for good.